The crystalline chandeliers overhead blurred into streaks of golden light as my feet pounded against the hotel's mirror-smooth marble. Each breath scraped my throat raw, my heart hammering so violently I thought my ribs might crack. The cardboard boxes in my arms weren't just supplies, they were proof I still had something left to lose. "Kayla, do you think you can just ignore me?" His voice ripped through the lobby's refined quiet like shattering glass. My ex. Every syllable dripped with the same venom that had poisoned 2 years of my life. I could feel him closing the distance, his rage a living thing that chased me across the pristine floor. One wrong step, one slip in these worn-out shoes, and he'd catch me. Here, in front of everyone, with my stained apron broadcasting exactly how far I'd fallen. The elevator bay. 30 feet ahead. 20. 15. The center car's brass doors were already kissing shut, a sliver of escape narrowing with every heartbeat. "Don't you dare." His hand swiped at my back, fingers catching air where my uniform had been a second before. No hesitation, no second thoughts. I hurled myself through the shrinking gap, a clumsy, desperate lunge that sacrificed dignity for survival. I expected cold metal, the back wall, maybe the floor. Instead, I slammed into something solid and unyielding, a body that didn't budge an inch from the impact. The collision stole the air from my lungs, sent my boxes scattering across polished elevator floors. I staggered backward, gasping, my vision swimming as I tried to focus. My gaze climbed. Expensive leather shoes, charcoal trousers with a knife-edge crease, a tailored jacket that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Then higher past broad shoulders, past a jaw carved from stone, until I froze. Ink. Black serpentine patterns writhed up his throat, intricate and menacing, disappearing beneath the snow-white collar of his dress shirt like secrets too dangerous to fully reveal. The artwork told stories of violence, of a life lived in shadows, a beast dressed as a businessman. The doors sealed shut behind me with a definitive click. The sound of my ex's furious pounding faded into nothing, replaced by a suffocating stillness that pressed against my eardrums. The elevator didn't move. Neither did the man. I'd escaped one monster only to lock myself in a cage with another. Welcome back to the channel. We have a wild romance thriller for you today. Before we dive into this high-stakes elevator entrapment, pause for a second, comment down below where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you love stories where the underdog finds protection in the most dangerous places, hit that like button and subscribe now. The elevator shuddered once, a mechanical groan that vibrated through the soles of my feet, and then stopped. Not the smooth deceleration of reaching a floor, this was wrong. The lights flickered, dimmed to half strength, casting shadows that turned the small space into something that felt more like a tomb than a luxury hotel amenity. My breathing was the only sound. Ragged, frantic. Each inhale seemed to echo off the mirrored walls, broadcasting my terror in stereo. I pressed my back against the cold metal panel, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the man who occupied the elevator like he owned it. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched when I'd crashed into him, hadn't even adjusted his stance when the elevator lurched to its unscheduled stop. He simply stood there, one hand resting loosely in his pocket, the other hanging at his side with the relaxed posture of someone who'd never known fear in his entire life. His eyes, dark, unreadable, swept over me with the precision of a surgeon examining a specimen. I watched his gaze catalog every detail. The coffee stain blooming across my apron's bib, the frayed hem of my uniform where I'd caught it on a housekeeping cart last week, the mascara I knew was probably smudged beneath my eyes from the tears I'd been fighting all day. He lingered on my hands, still trembling, knuckles white from how tightly I'd been gripping those boxes. "You're running." His voice was low, smooth as aged whiskey, with an edge that suggested he knew exactly what desperation looked like. Not a question, a statement of fact. I tried to swallow, but my throat had gone dry. The elevator had stuck. "We need to..." I reached for the emergency call button, but his hand shot out faster than I could track, catching my wrist midair. His grip was firm but not painful, his fingers warm against my pulse point where my heartbeat hammered a frantic rhythm. The touch sent an electric current racing up my arm, part warning, part something I didn't want to name. "Leave it," he said, his thumb pressing against the inside of my wrist, where my veins showed blue beneath pale skin. Could he feel how terrified I was? How my entire body was wired to flee even though there was nowhere left to run? "But we're trapped." "I know." He released me slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving mine. "The question is whether you're more afraid of being stuck in here, or of what's waiting for you out there." The knowing in his tone made my stomach drop. He'd seen everything. The chase, my ex's hands reaching for me, my desperate dive into what should have been safety. This stranger had watched me run for my life and hadn't said a word, hadn't offered help, had simply waited while I sprinted straight into his orbit. I don't know what you're talking about. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. One corner of his mouth lifted not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement of a game he was already winning. He bent down, movements fluid and unhurried, and picked up one of my fallen boxes. The contents had spilled. Miniature shampoo bottles, wrapped soaps, the tiny sewing kits the hotel provided in each room. He examined a bottle like it was an artifact from another world. You work here. Another statement. His eyes flicked to my name tag, crooked now from the collision. Kayla. The way he said my name made something in my chest constrict. Not threatening, exactly, but possessive. Like by speaking it aloud, he'd claimed some small piece of me. Housekeeping, I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. I'm nobody. Just I need this job. If they find out there was a scene, there won't be a scene. The certainty in his voice was absolute. He set the box down gently at my feet, then straightened to his full height. In the confined space, he seemed even larger, his presence filling every cubic inch of air. Not if you don't want there to be. I pressed harder against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. The elevator was maybe 6 feet across. He was 3 feet away. The mathematics of the situation trapped me more effectively than any locked door. Who are you? The question escaped before I could stop it. His head tilted slightly, and in the dimmed lighting, the tattoos on his neck seemed to move, serpentine patterns shifting with the play of shadow and muscle. Someone who recognizes fear when he sees it. Someone who knows the difference between running from something and running toward something better. I'm not. You are. He took one step closer. Just one. But it erased half the distance between us, and suddenly the air felt thinner, harder to breathe. The man chasing you. Boyfriend? Ex, I corrected automatically, then cursed myself for giving him anything. Ex, he repeated, letting the word hang between us. The kind who doesn't understand what ex means. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. What was the point of lying? This stranger with his expensive suit and dangerous ink had already read my entire pathetic story in the 30 seconds since the doors had closed. And you thought an elevator would save you. There was no mockery in his tone, just a flat observation that made me feel even more foolish than I already did. What happens when the doors open? The question hit like a physical blow. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Panic had narrowed my world to a single objective: escape. But escape to where? My ex knew my schedule, knew which entrance I used, knew exactly how long my shift lasted, and which bus I took home. I don't know, I admitted, my voice cracking on the last word. The elevator groaned again, lights flickering, but still we didn't move. The emergency lighting cast half his face in shadow, making him look even more like the predator my instincts screamed he was. But predators came in different forms. Some hunted. Others protected their territory. You need help, he said simply. I need this elevator to move. No. He leaned back against the opposite wall, mirroring my posture, his dark eyes never releasing mine from their grip. You need the kind of help that makes men like him disappear, permanently, quietly, so thoroughly they forget your name, your face, your existence. The words should have terrified me, should have sent every warning bell in my head screaming. Instead, something else unfurled in my chest, something dangerous and desperate and entirely too tempting. And you can do that? I breathed. His smile was slow, predatory, and absolutely devastating. Bella, I've done far worse for far less compelling reasons. The elevator lurched suddenly, lights blazing back to full brightness, and began its descent. The mechanical voice announced we were approaching the lobby, the exact place where my ex would be waiting, furious and humiliated that I'd escaped. What do you want? I asked as the numbers ticked down. 5, 4, 3. He pushed off the wall with lazy grace, adjusting his cuffs as though we'd just had a pleasant chat about the weather instead of a conversation that had fundamentally shifted something in the air between us. I want, he said, his voice dropping to a register that resonated in my bones, to see what you do when the doors open. Whether you run again, or whether you finally stand still and let someone fight for you. 2, 1. The elevator chimed its arrival, cheerful and oblivious. Through the narrowing gap of my own reflection in the mirrored doors, I could see the lobby beyond. See him, my ex, pacing near the elevator bank, his face twisted with rage. And beside me, this dangerous stranger waited to see what kind of woman I really was. The doors slid open with a whisper, revealing my ex like a stage curtain unveiling the final act. Marcus stood 10 feet away, his chest heaving, sweat darkening the collar of his faded band t-shirt. His eyes locked onto me immediately, pupils blown wide with that manic energy I'd learned to recognize too late in our relationship. The energy that preceded broken dishes, broken phones, broken promises that he'd never lose control again. There you are. His voice carried across the lobby, too loud for the space, drawing glances from guests settling into leather armchairs with their afternoon cocktails. You really thought you could just... He took a step forward, and I felt my body betray me, shrinking back instinctively. 2 years free of him, and my muscles still remembered the choreography of making myself smaller, less visible, less of a target. Then the man beside me moved. It wasn't rushed, wasn't aggressive. He simply stepped out of the elevator with the fluid grace of someone who'd never had to hurry for anything in his life, positioning himself between Marcus and me like a wall made of expensive fabric and controlled violence. He didn't touch me, didn't look back to check if I was following. He just stood there, hands loose at his sides, and somehow that stillness was more threatening than any raised fist could ever be. Marcus faltered mid-step. I watched recognition flicker across his face, not recognition of the person, but recognition of the type. The kind of man you didn't challenge, the kind whose presence alone shifted the air pressure in a room. We have a problem? The stranger's voice was conversational, almost pleasant, the kind of tone you'd use to discuss the weather or compliment someone's tie. But underneath, there was permafrost. Ancient ice that had crushed better men than Marcus. This is between me and my girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend, I corrected from behind the stranger's shoulder, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Having this man between us was like sheltering behind bulletproof glass. The stranger's head tilted slightly, a predator calculating angles. You heard the lady. Ex. As in, no longer your concern. As in, you've already lost whatever claim you think you had. Marcus's face flushed purple. I knew that color, knew what came after. Listen, asshole. I don't know who you think you are. No. The stranger took one step forward. Just one. You listen. He closed the distance between them with that same unhurried grace, and suddenly he was in Marcus's space, leaning in close enough that whatever he said next would be private. I couldn't hear the words. Nobody could. It was just the stranger's mouth near Marcus's ear, a whispered conversation that lasted maybe 10 seconds. But I saw Marcus's face. Watched the color drain from angry red to ash gray. Watched his hands start to tremble. Watched his eyes go wide with something that looked like primal terror, the kind that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to the hindbrain's survival instincts. When the stranger stepped back, Marcus stumbled backward like he'd been shoved. His gaze darted to me once wild, desperate, and then he turned and walked away. Not ran, walked, but with the stiff-legged gait of someone fighting every instinct to bolt. He didn't look back, didn't slow down, just headed straight for the hotel's main entrance and disappeared into the afternoon sun beyond the glass doors. The lobby's ambient noise rushed back in to fill the silence. Somewhere, elevator music played. A woman laughed at the bar. The world continued as though nothing had happened, oblivious to the fact that my entire reality had just shifted on its axis. The stranger turned back to me, adjusting his cuffs with casual precision. Up close, in the lobby's bright lighting, I could see details I'd missed in the elevator. The tattoos weren't random, they were deliberate, expensive work, intricate patterns that suggested money and meaning. His suit was bespoke, tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and a lean waist. The watch on his wrist probably cost more than my entire year's salary. He won't be back, he said simply. What did you say to him? My voice came out barely above a whisper. Nothing he didn't need to hear. He picked up the boxes I'd abandoned in the elevator, stacking them with surprising care before offering them to me. Your supplies. I took them automatically, our fingers brushing in the transfer. That same electric current from before sparked across my skin, making me acutely aware of every place we'd touched. I don't understand. Why would you? Because I can. He slid one hand into his pocket, regarding me with those dark, assessing eyes. And because now, Kayla, you owe me. The words settled over me like a contract I hadn't read before signing. I don't have any money. I can't. I don't want your money. His mouth curved into something that might have been amusement if it had reached his eyes. Money is easy. What I want is more complicated. Every warning instinct I possessed screamed at me to run, to thank him politely and disappear into the service corridors where people like him never ventured. But I stood frozen, caught between the urge to flee and the terrible, dangerous curiosity about what someone like him could possibly want from someone like me. "What do you want?" I asked, even though part of me already knew the answer would change everything. He glanced around the lobby, his gaze sweeping over the guests, the staff, the security cameras positioned in every corner. "Not here. Come with me." "I can't. My shift is covered." He checked his watch with the casual authority of someone accustomed to reality bending to accommodate his schedule. "I own 40% of this hotel. Your supervisor will be told you're assisting a VIP guest with a special request. You won't be missed." The revelation hit me like cold water. He owned part of the hotel. This stranger who'd materialized in an elevator wasn't just dangerous, he was powerful. Connected. The kind of person whose whispered threats could make Marcus flee in terror. "Who are you?" I breathed. "Walk with me, and I'll tell you." He started toward a corridor that led away from the public spaces, clearly expecting me to follow. After 3 steps, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Or go back to your cart and spend the rest of your shift jumping at shadows, wondering when he'll show up again. When he'll wait for you after work. When he'll follow you home." The boxes in my arms suddenly weighed nothing at all. Every miniature shampoo bottle, every wrapped soap, they were props in a life that had just been revealed as unsustainable. Marcus would come back. Maybe not today, but eventually. And next time, there wouldn't be a dangerous stranger to hide behind. I followed him into the corridor. He led me to a service elevator different from the passenger cars, utilitarian and plain. As the doors closed on us once more, the irony wasn't lost on me. I'd run from one elevator into another, each one carrying me further from the life I'd known and closer to something I couldn't yet define. "My name is Nino Fernandez," he said as we ascended, "and I'm about to offer you a choice that will either save your life or complicate it beyond recognition. Possibly both." The elevator opened directly into a penthouse suite I'd only ever cleaned from the outside, never been invited to enter. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, modern furniture that belonged in design magazines. A wet bar with bottles whose labels I couldn't pronounce. Nino moved to the windows, his silhouette framed by afternoon light. "I have a problem. A business complication that requires a specific kind of solution. What I need is a partner, someone to appear at my side, to attend events, to play a role." "What kind of role?" My voice echoed in the cavernous space. He turned, and the light caught his face in a way that made him look both devastating and dangerous. "My fiancé." The laugh that escaped me was pure disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious." He crossed to the bar, poured 2 glasses of something amber, and offered one to me. I didn't take it. I'm in the middle of a territorial dispute. Having a visible partner, particularly a civilian, with no connections to my world, sends a message. It suggests stability. Domestication. It makes me look less like a threat, and more like a man building a life. "What world?" I asked, though the tattoos and the whispered threat that had terrified Marcus painted a clear enough picture. His smile was sharp as a blade. "The kind where men like your ex learn to disappear when they're told to. The kind where problems are solved quietly, permanently, and without troubling the authorities. Mafia." The word hung unspoken between us, too dangerous to say aloud but impossible to ignore. "You're insane." I set the boxes down on a side table with shaking hands. "You want me to pretend to be engaged to you? I'm a maid. I make minimum wage. Nobody would ever believe. They'll believe what I tell them to believe." He took a slow sip of his drink, studying me over the rim. "You'll live here, be dressed appropriately, given everything you need to play the part convincingly. In exchange, your ex becomes a memory, your debts, and I know you have them, disappear. You'll be protected, compensated, and when our arrangement ends, you'll walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you choose. And if I say no?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Then you go back downstairs. Clock in for the rest of your shift. Hope Marcus stays scared. Hope your car doesn't break down. Hope you can make rent next month. Hope no one ever threatens you again." He moved closer, setting his glass down, stopping just inside my personal space. "Or you say yes, and you never have to hope again. You'll know. You'll be certain. Because I protect what's mine, Kayla. And for the duration of our arrangement, you will be mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have terrified me. Instead, it ignited something I'd thought Marcus had beaten out of me years ago. The capacity to want something dangerous simply because it promised to make me feel powerful. How long? I whispered. 6 months. Maybe less if things resolve quickly. Maybe more if complications arise. But no longer than a year. A year of my life, sold to play pretend with a man whose whispered words could make grown men flee. A year of safety purchased with performance and proximity to violence I couldn't begin to understand. I looked around the penthouse at the life I'd never be able to afford, the security I'd never be able to buy, the escape I'd never be able to engineer on my own. When do we start? I asked. Nino's smile was triumphant and terrifying in equal measure. We already have. My apartment, if the glorified storage closet in the hotel's staff housing could be called, that took less than 20 minutes to pack. One duffel bag for clothes that suddenly looked threadbare and sad under Nino's impassive gaze. A cardboard box for everything else. The books I'd collected from thrift stores. The chipped mug my grandmother had given me before she died. The photograph of my parents before the accident that had left me orphaned at 17. That's everything? Nino asked, surveying my entire life reduced to containers that could fit in a sedan's trunk. I travel light. The words came out more defensive than I'd intended. Easier to run when you don't have roots. Something flickered across his face, understanding, maybe, or recognition. You won't need to run anymore. 2 men in dark suits materialized as if summoned by thought alone, collecting my meager belongings with the efficiency of people accustomed to making things disappear. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't speak, just worked with the silent coordination of a well-oiled machine, and within minutes, my old life was loaded into a black SUV idling in the service entrance. The penthouse felt even larger when I knew I'd be living in it. Nino gave me the brief tour with the detached professionalism of a real estate agent. Master bedroom suite with a view of the city skyline. Guest rooms I wouldn't need. A kitchen I'd probably never use since he employed a private chef. A study lined with books in languages I couldn't read. Everything was expensive, minimal, and utterly devoid of personality. It looked like a showroom, beautiful and cold and temporary. Your room, he said, opening double doors to reveal a space 3 times the size of my former apartment. The bed was enormous, dressed in linens that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A balcony overlooked the city. The attached bathroom featured a soaking tub and a shower with more jets than made practical sense. Where's your room? I asked, hyper-aware that we'd be sharing this space, this proximity, this elaborate lie. He gestured to the doors directly across the hall. There. Close enough to maintain appearances if staff visit, far enough to preserve your privacy. The clinical way he said it should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like a reminder that this was business. A transaction. Whatever heat had crackled between us in that elevator was just a byproduct of adrenaline and circumstance. Nothing more. Someone will be here in an hour, Nino continued, checking his phone with the distracted air of someone with 1,000 other concerns. Lucia, she'll handle your wardrobe. Answer her questions honestly. She needs to know your preferences to do her job effectively. My preferences? I laughed, the sound hollow in the cavernous room. I shop clearance racks at department stores. I don't have preferences. His gaze lifted from his phone, pinning me with an intensity that made my breath catch. You do. You just haven't had the luxury of acknowledging them. Lucia will find them. He left me alone then, and I stood in the center of that ridiculous bedroom, feeling like an actress who'd wandered onto the wrong set. I caught my reflection in the floor-length mirror, stained uniform, frizzy hair escaping its ponytail, shoes with worn-down heels. This woman didn't belong in silk sheets and penthouse views. This woman belonged in service corridors and staff bathrooms, invisible and forgettable. Lucia arrived exactly 60 minutes later, like punctuality was a religion. She was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and a severe bun and eyes that assessed me the way Nino had, cataloging, calculating, already solving problems I didn't know I had. Strip, she said without preamble, setting down several leather cases that looked like they contained either makeup or torture implements. I'm sorry? Your uniform. Take it off. I need to see what I'm working with. Her accent was elegant, European, entirely unbothered by my obvious discomfort. Don't be shy, girl. I've dressed daughters of presidents and mistresses of kings. You think I haven't seen a woman's body before? I undressed down to my underwear, practical cotton things from a discount store, and tried not to die of embarrassment as she circled me like a sculptor examining marble. Good bone structure. Terrible posture. You carry yourself like you're apologizing for existing. She lifted my chin with cool fingers. That stops now. You're going to be Nino Fernandez's fiancé. That woman doesn't apologize. She doesn't shrink. She takes up space like it was made for her. Over the next 3 hours, Lucia transformed the room into a pop-up boutique. Designers I'd only seen in magazines brought rack after rack of clothing, cocktail dresses in jewel tones, evening gowns that probably required engineering degrees to construct, casual wear that somehow cost thousands despite looking effortless. Shoes lined up like soldiers, heels in heights I'd never attempted, boots that hugged calves I didn't know I had. "Try this one," Lucia commanded, handing me a dress in deep emerald silk that felt like water against my skin. I stepped into it, and she zipped me up with practiced efficiency. When she turned me toward the mirror, I barely recognized the reflection. The dress transformed my shape, highlighting curves I'd always hidden under shapeless uniforms. The color made my eyes look brighter, my skin luminous instead of pale and tired. "Better," Lucia declared. "Now we fix the rest." The rest involved a hairstylist who trimmed away split ends and added subtle highlights that caught the light. A makeup artist who taught me the difference between day and evening looks, her brushes dancing across my face until I looked like a polished version of myself, still me, but elevated. A manicurist who repaired the damage from years of cleaning chemicals, painting my nails a sophisticated nude that looked both elegant and understated. By the time they finished, the sun was setting, painting the city in shades of amber and rose. I stood in front of the mirror wearing a different dress, midnight blue with a neckline that hinted at sophistication without screaming for attention, and tried to reconcile this woman with the one who'd run through a hotel lobby 8 hours ago. "Much better," a voice said from the doorway. I spun, nearly losing my balance in the unfamiliar heels. Nino leaned against the frame, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The gesture should have made him look casual. Instead, it made him look dangerous, like a predator momentarily at rest. But it was the tattoos that caught my attention. With his sleeves rolled back, I could see them clearly for the first time. They didn't stop at his neck. They continued down both forearms in intricate, deliberate patterns. Not random art, each image meant something. A serpent coiling around his right forearm, scales rendered in obsessive detail. A compass rose on his left wrist, pointing nowhere. Roman numerals scattered throughout like timestamps of moments that mattered. "Come here," he said, and it wasn't a request. I crossed to him on uncertain legs, these heels requiring a completely different way of walking. He caught my hand when I got close enough, his thumb brushing across my newly manicured nails. "Lucia did well," he said, his eyes traveling over me with an assessment that felt different from the one in the elevator. "More personal, more possessive. You look like you belong here now." "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," I admitted. "Like any second, someone's going to realize I'm a fraud and send me back downstairs. Everyone is playing dress-up, Kayla. The only difference is some people have better costumes." He released my hand but didn't step back, maintaining that proximity that made the air feel charged. "The dress, the hair, the makeup, those are just armor, tools. What makes you belong isn't what you're wearing. It's how you carry yourself." I gestured at the tattoos now visible on his arms. "Is that what those are? Armor?" His expression shuddered immediately, and I knew I'd touched something raw. But instead of pulling away, he extended his right arm, presenting the serpent for my inspection. "Each one is a reminder," he said quietly. "The serpent, that's for my mother. She died when I was 12. Told me the week before that survival requires shedding your skin when it no longer fits. Becoming something new." I traced the scales with one finger, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath the ink. The intimacy of the gesture felt enormous, like I was touching something sacred. "And this?" I pointed to a date rendered in Roman numerals near his wrist. "The day I killed my first man." His voice was flat, factual. "I was 17. He'd ordered a hit on my uncle. Someone had to answer for it. I should have pulled away. Should have recoiled from this casual admission of violence. Instead, I found myself leaning closer, studying the other images scattered across his skin. A crown, a skull, a rose with thorns that looked sharp enough to draw blood. "You're not afraid," he observed, his dark eyes searching my face. "Maybe I should be." I met his gaze directly, surprised by my own boldness. "But I spent 2 years afraid of the wrong person, someone who pretended to be harmless and then used my trust to control me. At least with you, I know what I'm getting. You don't pretend to be anything other than what you are. And what am I?" The question was soft, dangerous, an invitation to see him clearly. I looked at the tattoos, the expensive clothes, The penthouse that spoke of wealth built on foundations I couldn't see. Looked at the man who'd made Marcus flee with nothing but whispered words. The man who'd offered me protection at a price that might cost more than money. Dangerous, I said finally. Powerful. Someone who keeps his promises, even the threatening ones. I paused, my hand still resting on his arm. Someone with scars who decided to wear them on the outside instead of hiding them. His free hand came up to cup my jaw, tilting my face toward his. For a breathless moment, I thought he might kiss me. Wanted him to kiss me, which was insane given that I'd met him hours ago and he was essentially my employer in the most unconventional arrangement imaginable. But he just studied me with those unfathomable eyes, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. You're more perceptive than I anticipated. That could be useful. Or dangerous. For you or for me. Both. He released me, stepping back and rolling his sleeves down with deliberate precision, covering the tattoos and the history they represented. Dinner is in an hour. Lucia left appropriate options in your closet. We're entertaining a business associate tonight. Consider it your first performance. Wait tonight? I thought I'd have time to prepare. You've had 3 hours of preparation. The rest you'll learn by doing. He paused at the door, glancing back with something that might have been amusement. Don't worry. I'll be beside you the entire time. Just follow my lead, and try not to look like you're plotting your escape. After he left, I returned to the mirror, studying this new version of myself. The dress, the hair, the makeup, they were armor, like he'd said. But underneath, I was still Kayla Olseen, the girl who'd grown up in foster care and learned to make herself small to avoid attracting attention. Except now I was supposed to attract attention. To stand beside a man whose whispered threats made grown men flee. To play the part of someone who belonged in penthouses and silk dresses and a world where violence was solved with Roman numeral timestamps. I touched my reflection, half expecting it to shatter like glass, revealing the maid underneath. It didn't. The woman in the mirror looked back at me with steady eyes, wearing her new armor like she'd been born to it. Maybe that was the first step toward making the transformation real. The underground poker game wasn't underground in the literal sense. It occupied the entire top floor of a building in the financial district. All floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art that probably cost more than most people's houses. But the moment Nino and I stepped off the private elevator, I understood the terminology. This was a world that existed beneath the surface of polite society, where money and power played by different rules. Nino's hand settled on the small of my back, warm through the thin silk of my dress. To anyone watching, it would look like affection. I knew it was guidance, control, a reminder that I was here to play a role. Smile, he murmured near my ear, his breath raising goosebumps along my neck. You're madly in love with me. You can't believe your luck. I arranged my face into what I hoped looked like adoration rather than terror. How's this? Convincing enough. His thumb traced a small circle against my spine. Stay close. Don't drink anything I don't hand you personally. And if anyone asks you questions, keep your answers vague and redirect to me. You make it sound like I'm walking into a war zone. You are. The weapons are just better disguised. The room was filled with men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses that cost more than my former annual salary. Cigar smoke hung in the air despite the ventilation system, mixing with perfume and the tang of aged whiskey. A poker table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by leather chairs and the kind of casual wealth that came from generations of knowing exactly how the world worked. Eyes tracked our entrance. Conversations paused. The attention was immediate and assessing, like predators evaluating whether we were threat or prey. Fernandez, a man called out from the bar, his voice carrying the jovial tone of someone who'd already had several drinks. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and a suit that screamed old money. You actually brought her. I thought Rodriguez was full of shit when he said you'd gotten yourself engaged. Nino's smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to be friendly, cold enough to discourage familiarity. Victor, good to see you. May I introduce my fiancée, Kayla Olseen? Victor's gaze raked over me with the subtlety of a strip search. I fought the urge to cross my arms, to make myself smaller. Instead, I extended my hand like Lucia had taught me. Firm grip. Direct eye contact. Charming, Victor said, holding my hand a beat too long. Tell me, my dear, how does a girl like you end up with a man like Nino? The question was a test. I could feel Nino's tension in the way his hand pressed against my back, ready to intervene if I stumbled. I could ask you the same thing, I said, injecting just enough flirtation to soften the deflection. How does anyone end up anywhere? Right place, right time, right elevator. I let my gaze drift to Nino with what I hoped looked like genuine affection, though I'd argue I got the better end of the deal. Victor laughed, releasing my hand. Elevator. That's a new one. Fernandez, you've got yourself a clever girl. Don't let this one slip away. I don't plan to, Nino said, his tone making it sound like a promise and a threat simultaneously. We moved through the room, Nino introducing me to men whose names I immediately forgot but whose eyes I would remember, calculating, dangerous, measuring me for weaknesses. I played my part, laughing at appropriate moments, touching Nino's arm with casual intimacy, existing as beautiful ornament and silent support. The poker game began with stakes that made my stomach turn. $50,000 buy-in. Pots that climbed into six figures. These men gambled with the kind of money that could change lives, and they did it with the bored detachment of people who had too much to care about losing any of it. Nino gestured for me to sit in the chair beside him, positioning me where I could see his cards. Another test, maybe to see if I could be trusted with information, or maybe just part of the performance, the devoted fiancé who stayed close. I watched the game unfold, the rhythm of betting and bluffing, the subtle tells that betrayed confidence or doubt. I'd learned to read people in my years of survival, learned to spot the signs of impending violence in Marcus's face, learned to anticipate which guests would be difficult, which managers would be fair. These skills translated. The man across from Nino kept touching his wedding ring when he bluffed. The one to his right drank faster when he had a good hand. But it was the woman 2 seats down who concerned me. Mid-40s, platinum blonde, dripping in diamonds that looked real. She'd been watching Nino all night with an intensity that had nothing to do with the cards. During a break in the game, while Nino was deep in conversation with Victor about shipping routes and tariffs, she made her move. "Nino, darling," she purred, sliding into the space beside him with practiced ease. "It's been too long. You haven't returned my calls." I recognized the tone, the possessive undercurrent, the challenge implicit in approaching him while I sat right there. This wasn't just a former associate, this was a former something else. Nino's expression remained neutral, but I felt him tense. "Simone, I wasn't aware you'd be here tonight." "Oh, you know me. I go wherever the interesting people are." Her hand landed on his forearm, fingers trailing over where I knew the tattoos hid beneath expensive fabric. "And you've always been the most interesting person in any room." This was dangerous territory. I could see it in the way the other men watched, in the predatory interest of people sensing drama. Nino was powerful, but reputation was currency in this world. How he handled this moment would either reinforce his position or create vulnerability. I stood smoothly, moving to Nino's other side and sliding my arm through his with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "You must be Simone," I said, infusing my voice with warmth that didn't reach my eyes. "Nino's mentioned you." It was a lie, but a calculated one. The implication clear. We talked about her. She was a topic, a resolved issue. Simone's smile sharpened. "Has he? How sweet. And what exactly did he say?" "That you were instrumental in his early business ventures," I continued, maintaining the pleasant facade while delivering the subtle blade. "It must be gratifying to see how far he's come since then. Past connections are so important to remember, don't you think?" Past. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Simone's eyes narrowed, recognizing the dismissal wrapped in courtesy. "Well," she said after a beat too long, "how lovely that he's found someone so supportive." The pause before supportive spoke volumes about what she really meant. "I'm sure you'll be very happy together, for however long it lasts." She drifted away, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume and barely concealed hostility. The men around us shifted, some disappointed the confrontation hadn't escalated, others reassessing me with new interest. Nino's hand found mine beneath the table, his fingers interlacing with mine in a gesture that looked casual but felt like an anchor. "That was well done," he murmured, his lips barely moving. "I've dealt with difficult people before," I whispered back. "Housekeeping teaches you things. How to deflect without direct confrontation. How to maintain professional courtesy while establishing boundaries." "She was my father's associate first," Nino said quietly, still holding my hand. "After he died, she thought the partnership would transfer to other arrangements. I declined. She didn't handle the rejection well. And you didn't warn me she'd be here?" "I didn't know she would be." His thumb stroked across my knuckles. "Victor likely invited her specifically to see how I'd react. how we'd react. Every gathering like this is a test. They're always looking for weaknesses. The poker game resumed, but the energy had shifted. The other players looked at me differently now, not as decoration, but as someone who'd held her ground in territory they all recognized. Nino's fiancée wasn't just beautiful and silent. She had teeth. 3 hands later, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Victor was cheating. Not obviously, the move was subtle, practiced. But I'd seen it before, in the underground card games Marcus had dragged me to. The ones that had started his gambling debts and ended with him stealing from my purse to cover his losses. Victor had a card up his sleeve, literally, and he'd just used sleight of hand to swap it during the deal. Nino was about to bet heavily on a hand he thought was strong. If Victor played the card I'd seen him pocket, Nino would lose, badly, and in front of everyone who was watching to see if he was still sharp, still dangerous, still worthy of the reputation that preceded him. I did the only thing I could think of. I knocked my wine glass over. The red liquid spreading across the green felt like blood. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I gasped, standing abruptly and making the chaos worse, my hands fluttering uselessly over the spreading stain. "I'm such a disaster. Nino, I'm so sorry." The game stopped. Cards were gathered. The felt would need to be replaced. In the confusion of cleaning up, I watched Victor's face as he realized his planted card was now soaked in wine and unusable. His eyes found mine across the table, and I saw recognition there. He knew I'd seen, knew I'd acted deliberately, but he couldn't say anything without admitting what he'd been planning to do. "Perhaps we should call it a night," Nino said smoothly, standing and pulling me against his side in a gesture that looked protective but felt possessive. "My fiancé isn't accustomed to these late hours. We should go." He collected his chips he'd been ahead before the interruption and guided me toward the elevator with the same calm authority he brought to everything. We didn't speak until the elevator doors closed, sealing us in the small metal box that seemed to be becoming a recurring theme in our relationship. "You saw," Nino said. Not a question. Up his left sleeve. He swapped it during the second shuffle. I sagged against the elevator wall, adrenaline draining now that we were alone. I grew up watching people cheat at cards. My ex was good at it. Victor's better, but not good enough. Nino turned to face me, his expression unreadable in the elevator's dim lighting. Then slowly, he began to laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but genuine amusement that transformed his face, making him look younger, more human. "What?" I asked, confused by his reaction. "I was wrong about you," he said, still smiling. "I thought I was getting an ornament, someone to look pretty and stay quiet, someone I'd need to protect and manage." He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup my face the way he had earlier, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. "But you're not that at all, are you? You're a survivor. You pay attention. You act when it matters. I just spilled wine. You saved me from a setup that would have cost me more than money. You handled Simone better than I would have. You walked into a room full of predators and held your own." His eyes searched mine, seeing something new. "I chose you because I thought you'd be easy to control, pliable, but you're not. You're dangerous in your own way. Is that a problem?" My voice came out breathier than intended, affected by his proximity, his touch, the intensity in his gaze. "No," he said softly. "It's perfect." The elevator opened to the penthouse, but neither of us moved. We stood in that small space, the tension between us shifting into something new, something that felt less like a business arrangement and more like a partnership, forged in the understanding that we were both survivors, playing roles in a world that demanded constant performance. "Thank you," Nino said finally. "For tonight. For being smarter than I gave you credit for." "You're welcome." I stepped out of the elevator on unsteady legs, these heels still foreign despite hours of wearing them. "Does this mean I passed the test?" "This means," he said, following me into the penthouse, "that tomorrow we start teaching you everything else you'll need to know. Because if you can handle Victor and Simone with no preparation, I want to see what you can do when you actually know the rules of the game." I kicked off the heels, immediately feeling more grounded. I thought I was just supposed to look pretty and stay quiet. Plans change. His smile was sharp, dangerous, and somehow warm all at once. "You're too valuable to waste on just decoration. We're going to make you formidable." As I headed toward my room, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back still wore the armor of silk and styled hair, but underneath, something had shifted. I'd walked into that poker game as Kayla Olsane, the maid pretending to be someone else. I'd walked out as someone who'd realized pretending might be the first step toward becoming. The charity gala was different from the poker game. More public, more cameras, more pretense that the people gathered in this ballroom were philanthropists rather than power brokers carving up the city like it was theirs to distribute. Crystal chandeliers threw prisms of light across women in gowns that cost more than cars and men whose smiles never quite reached their eyes. I'd been Nino's fiancé for 2 weeks now, long enough to learn how to walk in heels without wobbling, long enough to memorize the names and faces of his associates, long enough to understand that every social gathering was a chess match, where the wrong move could have consequences that extended far beyond hurt feelings. "You're getting better at this," Nino murmured as we moved through the crowd, his hand resting possessively on my hip. The touch had become familiar, almost comfortable. Almost. "You barely flinched when Castellano made that comment about your background." "He was trying to get a reaction," I said, accepting a champagne flute from a passing waiter but not drinking it. Nino's rules. I learned a long time ago that the best response to people trying to make you feel small is to take up more space. His fingers tightened briefly against my hip, something that might have been approval or pride. The line between performance and reality had started to blur somewhere between the poker game and today. The way he touched me in public had started to feel less like an act and more like possession. The way I leaned into him felt less like playing a role and more like seeking shelter. "Fernandez." The voice cut through the ambient noise of the gala like a blade through silk. I felt Nino go absolutely still beside me, his body transforming from relaxed to coiled tension in the space of a heartbeat. His hand on my hip became a grip. The man approaching us moved with the fluid confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Late 40s, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than the GDP of small nations, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes that reminded me of sharks, flat, cold, and utterly devoid of mercy. 2 men flanked him, large and silent, and radiating the kind of violence that didn't need to announce itself. They weren't trying to blend in. They were statements. "Dante," Nino said, his voice carefully neutral. "I didn't realize you'd be attending tonight. Last-minute addition." Dante's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "When I heard you were bringing your new fiancé, I couldn't resist the opportunity to offer my congratulations personally." The way he said fiancé made it sound like he was saying fiction or fantasy, like he could see through the performance to the reality underneath. His gaze settled on me, and I felt like I was being dissected, analyzed, reduced to component parts that could be cataloged and exploited. I'd been looked at by dangerous men before Marcus, Victor, the others in Nino's world, but this was different. This was a predator recognizing prey. "Dante Moretti," Nino said, his arm sliding around my waist and pulling me closer against his side. The move was possessive, protective, and utterly transparent in its intent. "This is Kayla Olsine." Kayla. Dante runs operations in the Southern Territories. Operations. I kept my voice steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. That's a delightfully vague way to describe what someone does for a living. Dante's laugh was sharp, appreciative. "I like her already, Fernandez. She has spirit." He extended his hand, and I had no choice but to take it. His grip was firm, his skin cool and dry. "Tell me, Kayla, how does a woman like you end up engaged to a man like Nino?" The question was almost identical to the one Victor had asked, but the intent behind it was completely different. Victor had been curious, testing. Dante was hunting for information, for weaknesses, for the cracks in our foundation. "I could ask how anyone ends up anywhere," I said, trying to channel the same deflection that had worked before. "Fate, chance, timing. But that's not really true, is it?" Dante interrupted, his thumb stroking across my knuckles in a gesture that made my skin crawl. "People like Nino and me, we don't leave things to fate. We calculate, we plan, we make deliberate choices." His eyes held mine, refusing to let me look away. "Which makes me wonder what deliberate choice led to you." "Dante." Nino's voice carried a warning that made the temperature in our immediate vicinity drop several degrees. "This isn't the time or place." "Oh, I disagree. This is exactly the time and place." Dante released my hand but didn't step back. If anything, he moved closer, invading the space that should have been a buffer. "You see, I've been hearing interesting things about your engagement. Very sudden, very convenient, right around the time you needed to project stability to certain interested parties." Nino's arm around my waist had become a band of steel. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the carefully controlled violence of someone who wanted to act but couldn't. Not here. Not with this many witnesses and cameras. "I also hear," Dante continued, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow felt more threatening than if he'd shouted that your lovely fiancé used to work housekeeping at the Grand Meridian, minimum wage, studio apartment in staff housing, no family to speak of, no connections, no history in our world. The words landed like blows. Each fact he recited was accurate, proof that he'd been digging into my background, investigating my past, looking for exactly this moment to expose the truth we'd been selling. Which makes me think, Dante said, his shark eyes moving between Nino and me, that perhaps this engagement is less about love and more about optics. A civilian girlfriend plays well, doesn't it? Makes you look domesticated, reformed, less of a threat during delicate negotiations. My relationship with Kayla is none of your concern, Nino said, his voice low and dangerous. And if you've been investigating her, you've already crossed a line. Lines are so subjective, don't you think? Dante's smile widened. I'm simply doing my due diligence. When someone like you suddenly acquires a weakness, and make no mistake, Fernandez, that's what she is. It becomes everyone's business. The word weakness hung in the air like a threat. I wasn't naive. I understood what he was really saying, that I was leverage, a target, a way to get to Nino through something softer than direct confrontation. She's not a weakness, Nino said, and something in his tone had shifted. This wasn't performance anymore. This was real anger, real protectiveness, barely leashed. She's mine, and anyone who forgets that distinction will find out exactly how I respond to threats against what belongs to me. Dante held up his hands in mock surrender. No threats, Fernandez, just observation. Just the natural curiosity of someone who finds it fascinating that a man like you would risk so much for someone so... His gaze swept over me dismissively. Ordinary. The insult should have stung. Instead, I felt something cold settle in my chest. This man had investigated me, knew where I'd lived, what I'd earned, the entire sad trajectory of my life before Nino. And he was using that information as a weapon, trying to drive a wedge between us by highlighting exactly how much I didn't belong in this world. If you'll excuse us, Nino said, already guiding me away from Dante with firm pressure on my waist. We have other people to see. Of course, of course. Dante's voice followed us as we moved through the crowd. Enjoy the evening, Kayla, and try to stay safe. The city can be so dangerous for ordinary people who wander into extraordinary circumstances. We made it to the edge of the ballroom before I realized I was shaking. My hands trembled around the champagne flute I'd been holding this entire time, the untouched liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Nino took the glass from me and set it on a nearby table. Then he pulled me into an alcove partially hidden by a marble column, his body blocking me from view of the crowd, his hands coming up to frame my face. Look at me, he commanded, and I did, seeing fury and something else burning in his dark eyes. Dante Moretti is a rabid dog looking for any excuse to start a war. He wanted to rattle you, to make you afraid. Did it work? Yes, I admitted, because lying seemed pointless when my whole body was betraying my fear. He knows everything about me, about who I really am, what I really am. What you really are, Nino said, his thumbs stroking across my cheekbones, is someone who survived poverty and abuse and kept her dignity intact. Someone who walks into rooms full of predators and holds her ground. Someone who's smarter and braver than half the men who claim to run this city. His grip tightened, forcing me to maintain eye contact. Dante thinks you're a weakness. He's wrong. You're becoming something much more dangerous than that. What am I becoming? The question came out as barely a whisper. Mine. The word was possessive, absolute, and no longer felt like part of our arrangement. And anyone who threatens what's mine learns very quickly why that's a mistake. He kissed me then, right there in the alcove where anyone could see. Not the chaste kiss of performance we'd shared for photos. This was claiming, consuming, a statement of intent that had nothing to do with optics and everything to do with the raw emotion I could feel vibrating through his frame. When he pulled back, his expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. We're leaving, now, and tomorrow, you're getting a security detail. No more going anywhere alone. Nino, not negotiable. He laced his fingers through mine, the gesture both intimate and possessive. Dante's right about one thing. You are a target now. Because of me, because of this arrangement, which means I protect you like I'd protect any asset I can't afford to lose. Asset. The word should have been cold, businesslike. Instead, the way he said it like I was precious, irreplaceable, made it sound like something else entirely. As we headed toward the exit, I glanced back and saw Dante watching us from across the ballroom. He raised his glass in a mocking salute, his smile promising that this was only the beginning. Nino stood between Kayla and the danger. If you stand against bullies and predators who prey on the weak, smash that like button. Let's show the world we don't tolerate intimidation. We drove home in silence, Nino's hand never leaving mine, his thumb tracing patterns across my knuckles like he was memorizing the feel of them. The city lights blurred past the windows, and I thought about weakness and strength, about being ordinary in an extraordinary world, about the moment when protection stopped being transactional and became something neither of us had planned for. I won't let him hurt you, Nino said as we pulled into the private garage beneath his building. Not our building. I still thought of it as his, despite living there for 2 weeks. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do. You understand that? I understood that somewhere between the elevator and tonight, the rules of our arrangement had changed. That the line between fake and real had blurred beyond recognition. That the danger we'd invited by creating this fiction had become more real than either of us anticipated. I understand, I said, and squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady strength of his grip. What I didn't say was that I was starting to realize the most dangerous thing in my life wasn't Dante Moretti, or his threats, or even the world Nino inhabited. It was the way I was starting to feel about the man beside me. The way his protection had stopped feeling like obligation, and started feeling like something I didn't have a name for yet. The way I was starting to forget this was supposed to be pretend. The penthouse door slammed behind us with enough force to rattle the expensive art on the walls. Nino's security team had peeled off in the garage, leaving us alone in the elevator that delivered us directly to his floor, our floor. The silence between us was explosive, charged with everything that had happened at the gala, everything Dante had said, everything we'd left unspoken. You don't get to do that, I said the moment we cleared the threshold, my voice shaking with residual adrenaline and something fiercer. You don't get to decide I need protection without asking me first. Nino turned, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing with barely controlled emotion. I don't need your permission to keep you safe. I'm not your property. The words came out louder than intended, echoing in the cavernous space. You said this was an arrangement, a business deal, but you kissed me in front of everyone, like I actually belonged to you. You think that was for show? He closed the distance between us in 3 strides, his presence overwhelming, intoxicating. You think anything about tonight was performance? I don't know what to think anymore. I threw my clutch on the nearest surface, the small act of defiance feeling enormous. Dante Moretti knows everything about me. He's investigating me. And you're acting like this is real when we both know it isn't. Isn't it? The question was quiet, dangerous, cutting through my anger like a blade through silk. When did it stop being fake for you, Kayla? Because it stopped being fake for me the night you saved me from Victor's setup. Maybe before that. Maybe the second you crashed into me in that elevator and looked at me like I was dangerous, and you didn't care. The confession hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him. This man with his expensive suits and violent history. This stranger who'd become the most important person in my life in a matter of weeks. You can't mean that. I never say things I don't mean. He reached for me, his hands framing my face with a gentleness that contradicted everything about him. You think I bring women to poker games? You think I introduce them to my associates? You think I lose sleep worrying about threats against temporary arrangements? Nino, I'm falling for you. The words were rough, torn from somewhere deep. And I don't know when it happened or how to stop it. And frankly, I don't want to anymore. Dante was right about one thing, you are a weakness. But you're also the only thing that's made me feel human in a decade. My breath caught in my throat. Every warning instinct screamed at me to step back, to remember this was supposed to be temporary, to protect myself before I got hurt. But I'd been protecting myself my entire life, making myself small and invisible and safe. And where had it gotten me? Running through hotel lobbies in stained aprons, hiding from men who thought they owned me. I'm scared, I whispered, my hands coming up to grip his wrists, holding him in place. I'm terrified of what you do, who you are, the world you live in, but I'm more terrified of how I feel when you look at me like that. Like I'm something precious instead of something temporary. You were never temporary. His thumb brushed across my lower lip, the touch sending electricity racing through my veins. From the moment you crashed into my life, you were permanent. I just didn't want to admit it. I rose on my toes and kissed him before I could talk myself out of it. Not the claiming kiss from the gala, but something slower, deeper, full of all the things I couldn't say aloud. His arms came around me immediately, pulling me flush against him. one hand tangling in my carefully styled hair and destroying Lucia's work without apology. The kiss turned desperate, frantic, 2 years of loneliness and fear dissolving under the heat of his mouth on mine. His hands found the zipper of my gown, and I didn't stop him, didn't protest when the expensive silk pooled at my feet. My fingers worked at his tie, his buttons, revealing the tattoos I'd only glimpsed before the full story of him written on skin I needed to touch, to memorize, to claim as thoroughly as he was claiming me. We made it as far as the hallway before he lifted me, my legs wrapping around his waist, his mouth never leaving mine. The bedroom door hit the wall, and then we were on his bed, not the guest room I'd been assigned, but his space, his territory, making this unmistakably real. "Tell me to stop," he breathed against my neck, his hands everywhere, reverent and possessive. "Tell me this is a mistake." "Don't stop," I gasped, arching into him. "Don't you dare stop." Afterwards, we lay tangled in sheets that cost more than my old apartment's monthly rent, his heartbeat steady beneath my cheek. The city lights painted patterns across the ceiling, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt safe. Not because of locks or security systems, but because of the man whose arms held me like I was something worth protecting. "What happens now?" I asked quietly, tracing the serpent tattoo on his forearm, following its curves with gentle fingers. "Now," Nino said, pressing a kiss to my hair, "we stop pretending this is temporary. We stop lying to ourselves about what this is. And what is it?" His arms tightened around me. "Everything I didn't know I needed until you crashed into my life running from monsters. Everything I'll burn the world down to protect." I should have been frightened by the possessiveness in his voice, by the promise of violence implicit in his words. Instead, I felt cherished, claimed, like I'd finally found someone who understood that love and protection could look like dangerous things in dangerous worlds. "I'm still scared," I admitted. "Good," he murmured against my skin. "Fear keeps you sharp, but you're not alone in it anymore. Whatever comes next, we face it together. If you believe everyone deserves someone who fights for them, who protects what's precious, drop a like right now. Comment below if you think real love is worth the risk. And subscribe, because this story is far from over." I'd been living in Nino's world for 3 weeks when I made the mistake that changed everything. The morning started ordinary enough, if ordinary could describe waking up in silk sheets next to a man whose tattoos told stories of violence while his hands had learned to touch me with devastating gentleness. Nino left early for a meeting downtown, pressing a kiss to my forehead and murmuring something about being back by lunch. His security detail waited outside, 2 silent shadows who'd become my constant companions. Except I'd forgotten my phone charger at the boutique where Lucia had taken me shopping the day before. A stupid, trivial thing. The store was 3 blocks away. I'd just slip out, grab it, and be back before Nino even knew I'd left. I told myself the security team would make it complicated, that I'd survived 23 years without armed guards and could handle 3 blocks in broad daylight, that I was tired of being watched every second, of living in a gilded cage even if the bars were made of protection instead of control. The lies we tell ourselves are always the most dangerous ones. I made it 2 blocks before I saw him. Marcus, standing on the corner like he'd been waiting, like he'd known exactly when I'd be alone. His face was different than I remembered, gaunt, desperate, with the manic energy of someone who'd burned through their last options and found only ash. "Kayla." My name in his mouth sounded wrong, corrupted. "We need to talk." Every instinct screamed at me to run. But we were on a public street, morning commuters flowing around us like water around stones. He couldn't do anything here, not with witnesses, not in daylight. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, already backing away, my hand diving into my purse for my phone. "Stay away from me, Marcus." Nino made it very clear. "Nino." Marcus laughed, the sound jagged and wrong. "Your mob boss boyfriend?" "Yeah, about him. Turns out there are people very interested in his personal life. People willing to pay for information about his civilian girlfriend." He took a step closer, and I saw it then, the absolute lack of fear in his eyes, the kind of recklessness that came from having nothing left to lose. "They paid me enough to disappear forever. All I had to do was deliver you for a conversation." The black van appeared from nowhere, tires screeching as it mounted the curb. Hands grabbed me from behind. How many? I couldn't tell, dragging me backward even as I screamed, even as I fought with every desperate technique I'd learned from 2 years of surviving Marcus's violence. My phone clattered to the sidewalk, screen cracking against concrete. I saw Marcus pick it up, saw him pocket it with hands that trembled, saw him turn and walk away without looking back as I was hauled into darkness that smelled of oil and fear, and the end of everything. The van door slammed shut. Someone zip-tied my wrists behind my back with brutal efficiency. A cloth bag went over my head, stealing my vision, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my own panicked breathing and the engine's rumble as we accelerated into traffic. "Don't bother screaming," a voice said, bored and professional. "Nobody's going to hear you where we're going." I screamed anyway. Nino's meeting ran long. By the time he returned to the penthouse, it was nearly 2 in the afternoon, his phone buzzing with messages from his security team that made his blood run cold. She left. On her own. No detail. "She's been gone 3 hours. He called her number immediately, pacing the penthouse like a caged animal as it rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. He tried again. Again. The 4th time someone answered. "Fernandez." Dante Moretti's voice was smooth, pleased, the sound of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "I was wondering how long it would take you to notice she was missing." The world narrowed to a single point of absolute clarity. Nino's hand tightened around the phone hard enough that the case cracked. "If you've touched her..." "I haven't touched her. Yet." The threat hung in the air like smoke. "She's comfortable, fed, unharmed. But that status is temporary and depends entirely on your cooperation. What do you want?" The words came out flat, dead, the voice of a man calculating murder. "A meeting. Just you and me. No security. No backup. You come alone to discuss the terms of her return, or I send pieces of her back to you in boxes." Dante's tone never changed, never rose, maintaining that conversational pleasantness that made the threat even more obscene. "Oh, and Fernandez? I used her ex to grab her. The one you scared off. Turns out he was more motivated by money than fear. Resourceful girl you've got, she fought like hell. Broke one of my men's noses before they got her secured." Pride and terror warred in Nino's chest. Of course she'd fought. Of course she'd made them work for it. But it hadn't been enough, and that was his fault. He'd let her believe she was safe. He'd let her walk around with minimal security. He'd gotten soft, distracted by how she felt in his arms instead of maintaining the paranoid vigilance that had kept him alive this long. "The meeting," he said, his voice empty of everything but cold calculation. "When and where? I'll send coordinates. You have 6 hours. Come alone, or she dies screaming." Dante paused, and Nino could hear the smile in his voice. "She really is lovely, by the way. I can see why you'd risk so much for someone so ordinary. Such a shame that love makes us all weak in the end." The line went dead. Nino stood in the center of his penthouse, surrounded by luxury that suddenly meant nothing, holding a phone that still showed Kayla's contact photo, her laughing at something he'd said, her eyes bright with life and joy, and the kind of happiness he'd thought was lost to him forever. He made 3 calls. The first to his most trusted lieutenant, the second to his weapons supplier, the third to the man who owed him a blood debt and had access to military-grade surveillance equipment. Then he opened the safe in his study and began selecting the tools he'd need for what came next. Not a rescue, not a negotiation, a massacre, surgical, efficient, and absolute. Dante Moretti had made a critical miscalculation. He thought taking Kayla made Nino weak, desperate, willing to bargain. He was wrong. It made him the most dangerous thing in the city. The warehouse sat in the industrial district where the city forgot to put streetlights, where businesses asked no questions, and security cameras had a habit of malfunctioning at convenient times. Nino's surveillance contact had tracked Dante's convoy here 2 hours ago, thermal imaging confirming 8 heat signatures inside 7 standing, 1 sitting. Bound. Kayla. Nino checked his weapons with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this too many times to count. 2 Glocks, 1 at his hip, 1 at his ankle, a knife strapped to his forearm, and the compact submachine gun his lieutenant had delivered with no questions asked. He wasn't here to negotiate, wasn't here to trade himself for her freedom. He was here to burn Dante's entire operation to the ground and salt the earth where it had stood. "You don't have to do this alone," his lieutenant said from the driver's seat, watching Nino prepare with the resignation of someone who already knew the answer. "I've got 12 men ready to move." "We could." "No." Nino's voice was empty, cold as a grave. "Dante wanted me alone. That's what he'll get. But not the version of me he expected." He stepped out of the vehicle into darkness that swallowed sound. No backup, no safety net. Just him and the absolute certainty that he would either walk out of that warehouse with Kayla, or he wouldn't walk out at all. The side entrance was locked but not alarmed arrogance or incompetence. It didn't matter. Nino picked it in 30 seconds. Muscle memory from a youth spent breaking into places that didn't want him. The door opened silently on hinges he'd had his people oil earlier. Inside, the warehouse smelled of concrete and rust, and the particular staleness of buildings left to rot. Voices echoed from deeper in the structure. He moved toward them with the patience of a predator, each step calculated, each breath controlled. 2 guards stood at the entrance to the main floor, smoking cigarettes and talking about a football game. They died before they could reach for their weapons. Nino's knife finding throats with the precision of someone who'd learned to kill quietly a long time ago. The main floor opened before him like a stage. Exposed metal beams overhead, shipping containers stacked against walls. And in the center, under a single hanging work light, Kayla. She was zip-tied to a metal chair, the bag removed from her head, her hair tangled and her lips split but her eyes blazing with fury instead of fear. 3 men surrounded her, not guarding her, just standing there like they were waiting for entertainment to begin. Marcus paced near the far wall, his hands shaking, looking like a man who'd just realized he'd sold his soul to the wrong devil. And in front of Kayla, crouched to her eye level like they were having a pleasant conversation, was Dante Moretti. "I'll ask one more time," Dante said, his voice carrying that pleasant conversational tone that made bile rise in Nino's throat. "Where does Nino keep his offshore accounts? The codes, the access protocols?" "I told you," Kayla spat, and Nino felt pride and terror surge through him in equal measure. "I don't know. I'm a maid pretending to be his girlfriend." "You think he shares his banking information during pillow talk?" Dante's hand shot out, catching her jaw and wrenching her face toward his. "You're lying. 2 weeks ago, you accessed his computer. My source saw you. I was checking my email, you psychopath." The blow came fast, Dante's backhand splitting her lip further. Nino's vision went red. He stepped out of the shadows like death taking physical form. The first guard went down with a bullet through his skull before anyone registered movement. The second managed to reach for his weapon before Nino's second shot took him in the chest. The third had time to scream before the third bullet ended him. Dante spun, his hand already pulling a gun from his shoulder holster, but Nino was faster, crossing the distance and kicking the weapon from his grip before it cleared leather. They went down in a tangle of limbs and violence, Nino's knife appearing in his hand like magic, seeking the spaces between ribs that would end this quickly. But Dante was good, better than Nino had anticipated. He caught Nino's wrist, twisting, forcing the blade away from anything vital. They rolled across concrete, each fighting for the killing position. Techniques honed in different wars but equally effective. "You came alone," Dante gasped, managing to get a knee into Nino's ribs. "Stupid. Emotional. This is why love is weakness." "Wrong," Nino snarled, headbutting him hard enough that Dante's nose exploded in a spray of blood. "It's what makes me willing to die killing you." In his peripheral vision, Nino saw Kayla moving. She'd somehow gotten one hand free, how? He couldn't imagine. But she had and was working on the second zip tie with her teeth and sheer determination. Marcus noticed too, stumbling toward her with the manic energy of someone trying to salvage a situation already lost. "You stupid bitch," Marcus shouted, grabbing for her. "You couldn't just sit there. You always had to." Kayla's freed hand shot up, her fingers finding Marcus's eyes with brutal precision. He screamed, stumbling backward, and she drove her shoulder into his midsection with all her weight, sending them both crashing into a support beam. The impact stunned him long enough for her to grab the gun from his waistband, the one he'd probably never fired in his life, and pointed at his chest with hands that barely trembled. "I'm done running from you," she said, her voice steady despite the blood on her face. "I'm done being afraid." She pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the warehouse like a declaration. Marcus crumpled, surprise etched on his face even as the life left his eyes. Kayla stood over him, the gun still raised, making sure he was dead before she lowered it. Nino used Dante's moment of distraction to reverse their positions, his knife finally finding the gap it had been seeking. Dante's eyes went wide, understanding and disbelief warring across his features. "You shouldn't have touched her," Nino said quietly, twisting the blade once. Everything after that was inevitable. Dante died with his shark eyes still open, staring at nothing. The warehouse fell silent except for their breathing. Nino rose from Dante's corpse on shaking legs, his suit ruined with blood that wasn't all his, and crossed to where Kayla stood frozen, the gun hanging loose in her grip. "It's over," he said gently, taking the weapon from her nerveless fingers and pulling her against his chest. "You're safe. I've got you," she shattered then, the adrenaline finally crashing, her body racked with sobs that tore at something in Nino's chest he'd thought was too scarred to feel. He held her through it, his hands careful on her damaged face, his voice murmuring things he'd never said to anyone, promises and apologies and confessions that this was his fault. All of it. I killed him, she whispered against his shirt. Marcus. I killed him. Good, Nino said fiercely. He deserved worse. They both did. She pulled back far enough to look at him, her eyes searching his face. What happens now? The police won't find anything. His lieutenant would already be en route with the cleanup crew. This never happened. They were never here, and neither were we. He lifted her into his arms, carrying her out of that warehouse and into the darkness beyond, leaving behind the bodies of men who'd learned too late that some things were worth any price, any violence, any consequence. 6 months after the warehouse, I stood in the Grand Meridian's marble lobby wearing a tailored suit that cost more than I used to make in 3 months, watching the evening shift change with the practiced eye of someone who understood every moving part of this operation. My operation now, the hotel Nino had purchased and placed in my name, along with a title that still felt surreal every time I saw it printed on business cards. General Manager, Kayla Fernandez. Yes, Fernandez. We'd made it official 2 months ago in a private ceremony that had nothing to do with business arrangements and everything to do with the fact that neither of us could imagine a future that didn't include the other. Miss Fernandez. My assistant manager approached with a tablet, her respect genuine rather than the careful politeness staff had shown the maid I used to be. The VIP suite on the top floor is ready for the anniversary guests. I've personally inspected it twice. Thank you, Caroline. I smiled, remembering when I would have been the one inspecting rooms, when my entire world consisted of cleaning supplies and the desperate hope that I could make rent. Make sure they receive the champagne upgrade. Complimentary. She nodded and disappeared into the controlled chaos of evening check-ins. I moved through the lobby, observing, correcting, managing the living organism that was a luxury hotel. Some of the staff remembered me from before, remembered the girl in the stained apron who'd sprinted through this very space, fleeing from a monster. Their respect now wasn't pity. It was earned. I'd worked every position in this building over the past 6 months, learning the business from the ground up, proving I deserved this role through competence rather than connections. Though the connections didn't hurt. Mrs. Fernandez. Victor emerged from the bar, his silver hair immaculate, his smile genuine rather than the predatory assessment from that first poker game. He'd become an unlikely ally after Dante's death created a power vacuum that Nino had filled with strategic precision. The hotel looks magnificent. You've transformed it. Thank you. Victor. I accepted the compliment with the grace Lucia had drilled into me, though I no longer needed her coaching. I'd found my own style, my own voice, my own way of moving through this world. Will you be joining us for the charity gala next month? Wouldn't miss it. He glanced toward the elevator bank, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Your husband just arrived. Try not to be too obvious about sneaking away early. Heat crept up my neck, but I didn't deny it. Nino and I had maintained certain traditions. Thursday evenings at the hotel, walking through the lobby where our story began, taking the elevator to the penthouse suite that was technically available for guests but somehow never seemed to be booked when we wanted it. I found him near the center elevator, the same one I'd crashed into 6 months ago, wearing one of his perfectly tailored suits with his sleeves rolled to reveal the tattoos that no longer seemed dangerous, just familiar. He was reading something on his phone, but looked up when I approached. His expression transforming in that way it only did for me warmth, replacing the cold calculation he showed the rest of the world. Manager Fernandez, he said, his voice carrying that hint of amusement he never quite suppressed when using my title. I'm here to file a complaint. Oh? I stepped closer, hyper-aware of the staff pretending not to watch us. We'd become something of a legend in the building, the maid who'd married the mobster, the Cinderella story with sharper edges and darker truths. What seems to be the problem? The service has been unacceptable. His hand found the small of my back, exactly where it had rested that first night at the poker game, but the touch felt different now. Earned. Real. I've been waiting at least 3 minutes for my wife to acknowledge me. Your wife has been working. But I leaned into him anyway, letting him guide me toward the elevator. Some of us have actual responsibilities. And some of us own 40% of the hotel and can demand better customer service. The elevator doors opened, revealing the same mirrored interior where everything had started. We stepped inside, and the moment the doors closed, sealing us in that small space, Nino pulled me against him, with the possessive certainty that still made my breath catch. I missed you, he murmured against my hair. We'd only been apart since morning, but the words were true anyway. We existed in each other's orbit now, satellite and planet, neither quite whole when separated. I missed you too. I tilted my face up, finding his mouth with mine in a kiss that tasted like coming home. His hands framed my face with the gentleness that contradicted everything he was to the outside world, thumbs stroking across my cheekbones where the bruises from Dante's warehouse had long since faded. The elevator climbed smoothly toward the penthouse, carrying us away from the lobby and the staff, and the carefully maintained image of the hotel manager and her dangerous husband. Here, in this small metal box, we were just Kayla and Nino, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and decided to build something real from the fiction we'd created. "How was your day?" I asked between kisses, my fingers working at his tie. "Productive, boring, the usual." His hands found my waist, pulling me closer. "Victor's shipping routes are finally cleared. The Eastern Territories are stable. Nobody's tried to kill me in at least a week." "Such a low bar for success," I teased. But the relief was real. The violence that had marked the first months after Dante's death had finally settled into an uneasy peace. Nino's position was secure, his reputation enhanced rather than damaged by how thoroughly he'd dismantled anyone who'd threatened what was his. The elevator chimed our arrival, but neither of us moved immediately. We stood in that space where everything had begun, where I'd crashed into him running from one life and stumbled into another, and I thought about how far we'd traveled from that desperate moment. "Do you ever regret it?" Nino asked quietly, reading my thoughts the way he'd learned to do. "This life, me, everything that came with saying yes in this elevator." I looked at him, this man who'd offered me protection and given me partnership, who'd promised safety and delivered transformation, who'd whispered threats to my enemies and confessions in the dark. The tattoos on his neck were familiar now, part of the map of him I'd memorized through months of learning to love someone whose edges were sharp enough to cut. "Never," I said, meaning it completely. "You gave me my life back. Then you gave me a better one, and then you gave me yourself." I kissed him again, softer this time, full of everything I felt and couldn't quite articulate. I'd crash into you in that elevator 1,000 times and make the same choice every single time. His smile was devastating, real, the one reserved only for private moments like this. "Good, because you're stuck with me now, Mrs. Fernandez, for better or worse." Mostly better, I hope, with occasional worse when I have to remind people not to threaten my wife. "Our wife," I corrected, making him laugh. The doors started to close, and we let them, sealed in our elevator for one more stolen moment before the world rushed back in. Partners in every sense, equals who'd started as prey and predator, civilian and criminal, maid and mob boss, and had become something neither of us had anticipated. Love forged in elevators and warehouses, built on danger and silk dresses, tempered by violence and validated by choice. Real, in ways that transcended the fiction we'd used to create it. As the elevator began its descent back to the lobby, because we had a hotel to run and an empire to maintain, and a life to build together, Nino pulled me close one more time. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for running into that elevator, for being brave enough to stay, for making me feel human again." "Thank you for catching me," I whispered back, in every possible way. The doors opened, and we stepped out together into the glittering lobby, into the life we'd built, into the future that stretched before us, with all its possibilities and dangers and moments of grace stolen between the chaos. Hand in hand, partners, survivors, together. Comment, true love wins. If you believe everyone deserves a protector who fights for them, someone who sees your worth even when you can't. Only bitter hearts want to see love fail. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let yourself be saved. See you in the next story.